If you think you've heard it all, think again. Picture this. Police respond to what they think is a routine call about a suspected case of neglect. But when they walk through the door, they don't just find children. They find a scene straight out of a horror movie. Mold creeping up the walls like veins, windows covered in filth, the overwhelming stench of human waste, and in the middle of it all, small children, barely clothed, hiding in corners like ghosts. No food, no warmth, no love. Just fear, silence, and a haunting secret that no child should ever have to keep. You're about to uncover a story so disturbing, so deeply twisted, that it might change the way you see your neighbors, your community, and even your own sense of safety. Because this isn't just a case of neglect. It's something far darker. A real-life house of nightmares. And the truth hiding inside it will chill you to your core. Now, I know you didn't just click this video for another sad story. You clicked because something in the title made your stomach drop. Something told you this wasn't ordinary. And you were right. This is the kind of story that'll sit with you long after the screen goes dark. But I promise you this. If you stay with me till the end, you'll get the answer you came here for. You will understand how this horror unfolded, how these children survived it, and why no one, not the neighbors, not the teachers, not even the system, saw it coming until it was far too late. And you'll also see how one quiet voice, someone the world ignored, became the key to cracking it all wide open. Let's talk for a second, not just as a narrator, but as someone who knows that stories like this leave scars. Maybe you're a parent. Maybe you grew up in a rough home. Maybe you've seen things you never told anyone about. That's why this story hits different. It's not just about what was found inside that house. It's about the human cost of silence, the invisible pain behind closed doors, and the terrifying ease with which children, innocent, vulnerable children, can vanish in plain sight. As we walk through this case together, I want you to really feel that. I want you to remember that every detail you hear isn't just a headline or a statistic. It's someone's lived reality. And in this case, it was reality for far too long. This video is different from anything else you've watched on this topic. We're not just throwing facts at you or sensationalizing pain. We're unraveling this nightmare step by step, diving deep into the psyche of everyone involved. The parents, the social workers, the cops who walked into that house and couldn't sleep for nights afterward. We're going to peel back the layers of the story. What was happening behind the walls, the bizarre routines, the dark secrets, and how fear kept everyone silent. You'll hear from neighbors who thought something was off but never said a word. From school officials who tried to help but hit red tape. And from the children themselves, what little they were able to say, fragments of a childhood lost to terror. And here's where you come in. I'm not just talking at you. I'm asking you to be part of this investigation. Think about what you would do if something seemed off in your neighborhood. Would you speak up? Would you dig deeper? Or would you convince yourself it's none of your business? Because sometimes, just sometimes, a child's life depends on someone refusing to look away. That's the power of being an informed, alert, and compassionate viewer. You're not just watching this, you're taking a stand against the kind of darkness that hides in plain sight. As this story unfolds, I want you to keep asking yourself, how did it go this far? Who failed these kids? And what exactly did police uncover that made even seasoned detectives break down in tears? There's one particular room in that house, one that officers described as the most disturbing place they've ever set foot in. What was in that room? Why were the children so afraid to speak about it? And what does it reveal about the adults who are supposed to protect them? Stick with me. The answers are coming. But trust me when I say, the most horrifying part of this story hasn't even been told. Why to understand how this nightmare came to life, we need to rewind just a little. Not to the moment the police burst through that rotted front door, but to the days leading up to it, when small signs began to surface, barely noticeable at first. The mother, a woman named Erica Daniels, had always kept to herself. She wasn't the kind to join PTA meetings or wave at neighbors from her porch. In fact, most people on the block couldn't remember the last time they saw her face in the daylight. And yet, there were whispers, little things that didn't sit right. Packages piling up outside the front door for weeks without being touched. The same stained curtains drawn tight day and night. and a pungent odor that started seeping from the house carried downwind into nearby yards, especially when the summer heat rolled in. People noticed. They gossiped. But no one knocked. No one called. No one intervened until it was too late. Erica wasn't alone in that house. She had a boyfriend, Marcus Bell, who had moved in about a year prior, almost as quietly as he would later vanish. He wasn't on the lease, and most of the neighbors didn't even know his name. But those who caught a glimpse described him as intense, never smiling, always pacing, and strangely paranoid. One neighbor recalled how he once stood by the window for hours, just staring out, arms crossed tightly against his chest, like he was waiting for something or someone. Some said he was on drugs. Others said he had a military background, and that maybe the things he'd seen had broken something inside him. But then again, it's easy to craft stories about people you don't understand. The truth? No one really knew who Marcus was. And that's what made the whole thing even more terrifying. Erica's own past was hard to trace. Public records showed she'd once lived 2 states over, under a different name. No father listed on the children's birth certificates. No real employment history. And yet, somehow, she managed to fly under the radar of every safety net that's supposed to catch cases like this. Child protective services, school counselors, healthcare providers. She homeschooled the kids, or at least claimed to. But when detectives began piecing together the timeline, they found no real curriculum, no educational materials, no evidence that the kids had ever been properly registered with any schooling system. It was as if Erica had been slowly erasing her family from society, one form, one connection at a time, until no one even knew the children existed anymore. That isolation is where the darkness grew. What's still unclear is whether Erica was the mastermind behind it, or just another pawn in something larger and more sinister. Because here's where the story starts to twist. When police finally got access to the home, they didn't just find filth and neglect. They found symbols, strange, drawn markings on the walls, hidden behind furniture and under loose floorboards. Old books filled with disturbing imagery, scrawled in the margins with what seemed like code. The kids weren't just living in squalor. They were being conditioned, possibly indoctrinated, in ways that suggest something beyond neglect, something methodical, ritualistic even. But what was the belief system behind it? And why did it seem like they were preparing for something? The children themselves were eerily quiet. And this is where things start to get murky. Because as the investigation widened, multiple names started to emerge. A former neighbor said she'd seen a third adult entering the house several times a week, never staying long, always wearing a hoodie pulled tight over his head.
She assumed it was a delivery guy.
But no delivery records existed. Another neighbor mentioned seeing Marcus driving late at night, headlights off, coming and going at hours no one could explain. Was Marcus operating alone, or was there an underground network involved? Was this about control, abuse, or something far more calculated? Even the timeline is suspect. Surveillance footage from nearby traffic cameras shows Erica's car in locations far from her home during times she claimed she was at the house. Phone records show texts to unknown numbers with cryptic messages, strings of numbers, single letters, and occasional phrases like, "It's done," or "They've been fed." Investigators aren't even sure if those messages were about the children, or something else entirely. It's clear now that this wasn't just a chaotic household. It was a carefully maintained illusion. And it's raising bigger questions. Who was protecting Erica and Marcus? How did they afford to live without jobs or income? Was someone funding them or watching from a distance? As detectives try to untangle the lies, one name keeps reappearing: Sharon Miller, a former child psychologist who lived nearby and had volunteered in the community for years. A warm smile, just when investigators thought they were making progress. Connecting dots, peeling back layers, everything began to unravel. The lead detective on the case, Daniel Rhodes, had been working overtime, obsessed with the inconsistencies in Erica's timeline and Marcus's mysterious behavior. But then, without warning, a crucial piece of evidence simply vanished. It was a flash drive, confiscated during the search of the house, labeled with the word "choices" in faded black marker. Rhodes remembered plugging it in briefly during the initial sweep. What he saw haunted him. Grainy video clips of the children inside the red room, sitting silently, staring forward, as a distorted voice echoed off camera. The voice gave instructions, commands, like it was running a drill. One clip showed Erica sitting nearby, emotionless, like she wasn't even present in her own body. But before Rhodes could copy the files or send them to the tech team, the drive was logged into evidence, and then it disappeared. Gone without a trace. No checkout records. No chain of custody. Just vanished. The department launched an internal audit, but everyone hit the same dead end. Rhodes was furious. He accused the evidence clerk of mishandling the chain. But when security footage was pulled from the evidence room, a 2-hour gap appeared. The system had glitched, or at least that's what they were told. But Rhodes didn't buy it. Someone didn't just misplace that drive.
Someone wanted it gone.
And that someone had access, maybe from inside. It was the first time Rhodes realized he might be playing a game with rules he didn't understand, up against people he couldn't see. Then came the message. A plain white envelope slipped under his office door in the middle of the night, no postage, no name. Inside was a single photo, an old one. Erica, much younger, sitting in what looked like a therapy circle. Next to her, Sharon Miller. The caption scribbled on the back simply read, "Ask her what she did in '98. That was nearly 3 decades ago. Long before Erica disappeared off the radar. Long before the children were born. Rhodes dug into Sharon's background again. She had worked briefly at a now-defunct group home in a neighboring state. No formal accusations, but there were whispers, rumors of unethical practices, kids running away, complaints that never made it past administration. When Rhodes tried to contact former employees, most were unreachable. One had died in a fire. Another refused to speak, citing a non-disclosure agreement and visibly trembling during a short phone call before abruptly hanging up. Still, Rhodes couldn't let it go. He paid a visit to Sharon's home under the guise of following up. She welcomed him in with her usual calm demeanor, offered tea, smiled warmly, like always. But as she turned to grab a file from the counter, Rhodes noticed something odd, a framed photo partially tucked behind a stack of books. It was a group shot, old and faded, but unmistakable. Erica was in it. So was Marcus. And right at the center was Sharon, arms around them both, smiling like family. This wasn't just a casual relationship. They had history, deep, deliberate, and hidden. When Rhodes asked about it, Sharon didn't flinch. She just said, "Some connections don't need explaining." Then she walked him out and locked the door behind him. That was the last time anyone from law enforcement got near her. But the deeper Rhodes looked, the more strange things started happening. His tires were slashed outside his house. His phone glitched during calls, strange static cutting in whenever he mentioned the Daniels case. One night, his security system caught a man in a hood circling his house at 3 a.m., just standing at the edge of the property for nearly 10 minutes before walking away. The man's face was never captured. The next morning, Rhodes found a small note taped to his windshield. It read, "Stop chasing shadows. Or, we'll start chasing you." He reported everything, of course. But no fingerprints, no surveillance hits, nothing to follow. And still, no sign of the missing flash drive. Meanwhile, the children had been placed in protective custody, but something strange was happening there too. The oldest, the 11-year-old girl, started drawing the same symbol over and over again in her notebooks, an inverted triangle with a circle in the middle and what looked like 3 teardrops beneath it. Rhodes had seen that symbol before. It was etched into the wood inside the red room. It also showed up in one of the old books recovered from the house, on a page referencing something called the Path of Obedience. No religion matched it. No cult database contained it. And the FBI's behavioral unit had no official record of anything similar. It was like a ghost doctrine, something passed quietly underground, known only to a select few. And then came the biggest twist yet. Erica's ex-neighbor, the one who had claimed she never saw Marcus during the last month before the bust, came forward again. This time she brought something with her. A photograph, taken from her backyard security cam, 2 weeks before the police raid. It showed a man standing near Erica's garage door, helping load a box into the back of a nondescript white van. But it wasn't Marcus. It was someone else. Someone who looked eerily like
Rhodes.
The detective froze when he saw it. It wasn't him. He knew it wasn't. But the resemblance was undeniable. And the timestamp? It aligned with one of the days he had blacked out in his calendar, when he'd been home with a migraine, phone off, no alibi. The implications were chilling. Was someone trying to frame him? Was this deeper than he ever imagined? Or was there something about his own past he hadn't yet uncovered? The questions kept piling up, and the danger felt closer than ever. Someone was manipulating the story, bending reality, erasing facts, planting seeds of doubt. And Rhodes was no longer sure who to trust, including himself. And just as the pressure reached a breaking point, something, or someone, knocked at his door in the dead of night. He looked through the peephole and saw the youngest boy from the house.
Alone.
In pajamas. Covered in dirt. No words. Just holding something in his small, shaking hands. A second flash drive. But what's on it will change everything. That's the part that froze investigators in their tracks. Because when they scoured the house, there was no red room to be found. Not initially. It was only after the oldest child hesitantly pointed to a narrow panel behind the pantry that officers discovered a small crawl space, painted entirely crimson, from ceiling to floor. What they found inside has not yet been made public. But law enforcement sources say it was beyond disturbing. 2 boys and a girl, ages 7 to 11, barely responsive, avoiding eye contact, whispering among themselves in what seemed like a language only they understood. One officer swore that the youngest boy kept repeating a phrase under his breath, over and over. He watches from the red room. Detective Rhodes stared at the boy standing in the doorway, barefoot and trembling, his small frame casting a ghostly silhouette in the porch light. The child didn't speak, didn't blink, just held out the second flash drive like it weighed more than he could bear. Rhodes crouched to meet his eye, quietly taking the device without a word. As he reached out to guide the boy inside, a sharp gasp escaped him. Beneath the child's shirt, just visible above the collarbone, was that same haunting symbol, the inverted triangle with a circle and 3 teardrops. But this time, it wasn't drawn. It was carved. Fresh, red, deliberate. Someone had marked him. Rhodes brought the boy in, wrapped him in a blanket, and immediately contacted Child Protective Services, only to be told the boy had never been reported missing. According to the system, he was still in the care of his temporary foster family over 60 miles away. As authorities scrambled to understand how he disappeared unnoticed, Rhodes loaded the second drive onto his secure laptop. Unlike the first one that vanished, this one had no labels, no folders, just a single file titled Truth_Part_1. The video opened to a dim room, the familiar grainy quality making it almost impossible to identify faces clearly. But one voice echoed crystal clear. It was Erica's. Calm, rehearsed, cold. We were told obedience would bring peace. That disobedience would bring the cycle again. The video showed what looked like a ritual of some sort, involving the children repeating phrases after her. Then, suddenly, a shadow crossed the screen, someone watching, recording. Not Erica. Not Marcus. Someone else entirely. Someone who had not yet been identified in this entire case. The video ended abruptly, but not before revealing the most shocking detail yet. On the wall behind Erica was a photograph, framed and perfectly centered. A group shot. In it stood Erica, Marcus, and Detective Daniel Rhodes. Staring at the screen, Rhodes felt a sensation unlike anything before, a dizzying mix of dread and disbelief. That photo wasn't real. It couldn't be. He'd never seen it in his life. But there it was, plain as day, confirming his presence at a place he had no memory of ever being. Was this some digital manipulation? An elaborate setup? Or had something been hidden from him, maybe even from himself? And then his phone buzzed, an unknown number. Just one text. Check your sister's basement. Until that moment, Rhodes had kept his professional life strictly separate from his personal world. His sister, Laura, lived in the outskirts of town, kept to herself, taught art at a community college, and had no known connection to the case. Still, something in that message felt threatening, personal. Within the hour, he was knocking on her door. She looked startled, confused by his urgency, but let him in without question. When he explained the message, her face paled. She hesitated before speaking, then admitted something she hadn't told anyone, not even him. "There's been someone watching the house," she whispered. "The same car, parked across the street, almost every night for the past week. I didn't want to worry you." Rhodes descended into the basement, flashlight in hand, expecting to find maybe some surveillance equipment, a discarded note, something minor. But what he found was far worse. Behind a false panel in the wall was a set of boxes, old VHS tapes, Polaroid photos, and documents all bearing one name, Camp Novice. A facility long shut down, rumored in obscure forums and conspiracy blogs, supposedly a reconditioning center for difficult children in the 90s. It had been wiped from most public records after a major class action suit in 1999 that was mysteriously settled out of court. And in one of the photos, sitting on a cot, was Erica. Next to her, a boy with a familiar face, a younger Rhodes. He dropped the photo as a sickening chill crept through his spine. Back upstairs, Laura confessed something she had kept buried since they were kids. They had been at a camp together one summer when Daniel was 10. Their parents had struggled with his outbursts and emotional swings, and a local therapist had recommended a private, behavioral retreat for troubled children. Daniel never remembered much about it afterward, just pieces, shadows, a few nightmares that lingered into adulthood. But now it all felt too real. Could that place be the link between him, Erica, and this horrifying present? Before he could process the implications, the doorbell rang. A courier. No return address. Just a manila envelope with Rhodes' name. Inside, a black and white photo, taken days ago, showing Rhodes sleeping in his car outside Laura's home. On the back, written in blocky, red ink, "It's not just them.
It's you.
You just don't remember." Suddenly, the lines between hunter and hunted blurred. If Rhodes really was involved in something all those years ago, unknowingly or otherwise, it meant someone had been planning this for decades. Every lead he thought he controlled, every suspect he interrogated, every clue he uncovered, had he been following a path someone else laid out for him? The idea that he might be part of the very mystery he was trying to solve shook him to the core. Was this a plot to destroy his life, or a reckoning for something buried deep in his past? And as he stood there, his thoughts spinning, his phone buzzed again. A new message, a new address, and just 3 words: "She's still alive." But who was she? Erica? Someone else? Someone they never even realized was missing? He didn't know, but he was about to find out. The wind was howling by the time Detective Rhodes arrived at the address and message. An old farmhouse, hidden behind a dense thicket of evergreens just off a long-abandoned county road, stood silent and shadowed. There were no lights, no vehicles nearby, just the kind of stillness that makes your gut twist and your breath catch before you even step out of the car. He checked his service weapon, not because he planned to use it, but because there was a growing ache in his chest, a creeping fear he couldn't shake. His entire life had become a labyrinth of unanswered questions, and every path he followed seemed to end in a mirror, forcing him to confront the possibility that the truth might not just be buried, it might be hidden inside himself. Inside the farmhouse, the air was thick with dust and rot. "Gee," he finally whispered, but even as he said it, he knew it was hollow, because it explained everything. The gaps in his memory, the inconsistencies, the people who suddenly vanished when he got too close, the voice on the phone, the hidden footage. It all made a horrific kind of sense now. Erica walked over to the laptop, removed the flash drive, and pocketed it like it was hers. "You were part of something that never should have existed," she said, her voice now colder. "And we tried to give you a life after it ended, but you just wouldn't let go." He backed away from her, stumbling over a chair. "Where's my sister?" That made her pause. "She's safe.
For now.
But if you keep trying to unravel this, she won't be. And neither will you." The door clicked shut behind her, and Rhodes was left standing in the ruins of everything he thought he knew. The person he had trusted more than anyone had just walked back into his life, not as a victim, but as a handler. And he couldn't tell anymore if she was there to warn him or to silence him once and for all. And somewhere, in the back of his mind, a new voice began to echo, a voice that sounded like his but wasn't. It whispered, not with fear, but with purpose. You built the lie. Now tear it down. Rhodes didn't know how long he sat in the silence that followed Erica's departure. Time didn't move in a straight line anymore. Minutes felt like hours, and hours collapsed in on themselves. What had started as a routine investigation into a disturbing welfare call had unraveled into a sprawling nightmare that somehow began and ended with him. He had chased shadows and ghosts for so long, only to find out he might be one himself, an echo of a life he didn't even remember living. But now, there were no more illusions of control. The stakes weren't abstract anymore. They were flesh and blood. His sister was still out there, alive, but held like a pawn in some grotesque psychological game. And he had no idea who was pulling the strings, only that he'd spent years unknowingly serving their purpose. The next morning, an unmarked envelope slid under his door. No return address. No writing on the outside. Inside, a single photograph. It showed his sister, Caroline, sitting in what looked like a small, windowless room. A faint bruise darkened her temple, and a newspaper rested in her lap. Today's date clearly visible. Beneath the photo, a typed message read, "You get one chance. Walk away. Or she doesn't." That was it. No demands. No instructions. Just a silent, suffocating threat. Rhodes' gut twisted with a nausea that didn't fade. He had been pushed to the edge before, but this was different. This wasn't about his career, his reputation, or his mind. This was personal. And yet, the ultimatum was clear. Drop the investigation and let the truth rot where it lay, or lose the only person in the world who still mattered to him. But how do you walk away when your every instinct tells you that doing so allows monsters to thrive in the dark? That children may still be suffering in places like Camp Novice? That whatever program Erica alluded to is still active, still molding, still destroying lives? He drove for hours, aimlessly at first, before pulling up outside an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, his uncle's place, long abandoned. But he knew someone would be there. He had received texts from a block number for weeks now, always cryptic, always timed just when he was about to quit. They'd let him hear, and when he stepped inside, sure enough, someone was waiting. It was Caleb, an old friend, someone he hadn't seen in almost a decade. Rhodes had written him off years ago, after Caleb got caught up in drugs and conspiracy forums. But now, here he was, standing in the dark, holding a folder thick with photos, transcripts, and government seals. "You should have stayed out, Daniel," Caleb muttered, not unkindly. "You've scratched too far beneath the surface."
They know who you are now.
"And they know you know." Rhodes stared at him, jaw clenched. "What is this, Caleb? Why were you sending me those messages? I couldn't let you forget everything. I couldn't let them win." The words hit hard, but Rhodes couldn't ignore the bitterness behind them. "What did they do to you? They used us, man. All of us. Foster homes, group homes, youth camps, we weren't placed there by chance. They were watching how we responded to trauma, what choices we made under stress. They thought they could manufacture loyalty. But it broke most of us. You just happened to be one of the few who didn't remember, so they let you start over." The folder Caleb handed him was heavier than it looked. Inside were records of children shuffled from one institution to another, many of whom had later disappeared without a trace. Some of them had Rhodes' name attached. He had signed off on transfers, believing he was helping. But he'd unknowingly been delivering them into the very system that had once consumed him. His knees buckled beneath him, and he dropped to the ground, folders scattering like ash. "They gave you a new life," Caleb said quietly. "And now they want you to protect it by staying silent. But you already know the cost." That night, Rhodes stared at his phone for hours, thumb hovering over Caroline's contact, knowing it was pointless. He wasn't even sure she'd be the one to answer if he called. But before he could act, the phone buzzed. Unknown number. No caller ID. He hesitated, then answered. A voice on the other end was distorted, mechanical. You've seen enough to understand. Now choose. Your sister or the truth. And just like that, the line went dead. Rhodes sat there in the dark, his mind splintering beneath the weight of the choice. Save Caroline and bury the truth forever. Or risk everything, knowing he might lose her in the process. The photo, the folder, the files, it all pointed to something bigger, something that could finally expose the operation and shut it down. But if he moved forward, there would be no second chances. And as if to drive the point home, a fire ignited in the field outside. Someone had torched the farmhouse. Flames licked at the night sky as Rhodes ran out into the smoke, coughing, yelling, searching for Caleb, only to find the car gone, and the folder with it. The only thing left behind in the dirt was a photo. This time it was of Rhodes himself, taken from across the street, just hours ago. He wasn't just chasing the truth anymore. Now it was chasing him. Rhodes didn't sleep the night the farmhouse burned. He drove with nowhere to go, hollow-eyed and fevered, adrenaline pulsing with every beat of his heart. The call, the fire, the photograph, everything had shifted. He wasn't investigating anymore. He was being hunted. He no longer wondered if someone was watching, he knew. Every reflection, every parked car, every flicker of a shadow behind him felt like a loaded weapon pressed against the back of his head. But even fear couldn't dull his resolve. His sister was still out there, and now he knew who had her. Everything pointed back to a facility buried beneath a false name, Redbridge Behavioral Institute, a name that meant nothing on the surface, but had quietly consumed government contracts for years under the guise of mental health services. Rhodes had skimmed past it in Erica's files before, thinking it was just another defunct treatment center. But in Caleb's folder, he'd found a photo, his own face as a teenager, sitting in a group therapy session stamped with the Redbridge insignia. He had been there before. They had wiped it clean from his memory. The storm-drained tunnels that ran behind the woods, leading straight to the foundation. The sky was the color of steel as he descended into the drain, flashlight flickering, boots sloshing through knee-deep sludge. For a moment, he felt like a child again, crawling into darkness because no one ever came looking. But this time he wasn't lost. He was here to find. Inside Redbridge, it was colder than he imagined. Clinical. Silent. Getting inside wasn't easy. Redbridge sat just outside state lines, concealed behind the shell of a recently closed corrections facility. The front gate was chained shut, but Rhodes knew the back routes. He wasn't investigating strangers. He was digging through the debris of his own erased past. Long hallways hummed with fluorescent lights that hadn't shut off in years. Desks covered in dust stood untouched, but cameras above still blinked red. It wasn't abandoned. It had just been buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and silence. And when Rhodes stepped through the last set of reinforced doors, he found himself in what looked like a low-tech control room. One wall held a series of monitors, some live, some static. He didn't need to guess what they showed. Children. Still here. Still trapped. Watching from sealed rooms where sunlight never reached. Then he saw her. Caroline. Sitting on a bed, bruised but breathing, staring blankly ahead. A voice startled him from behind. Calm. Detached. I expected you'd find your way back here eventually. Rhodes spun around. A man stepped out from the shadows, clean-cut, unassuming, dressed like a doctor but with the cold precision of someone who hadn't touched a patient in decades. He wore a badge with a familiar name. Dr. Philip Mercer. Rhodes had read the name in Erica's research, but assumed he was long gone. Instead, Mercer was alive and still in charge. You erased everything, Rhodes said, voice shaking. You turned us into case studies. Experiments. Mercer's smile didn't reach his eyes. We gave you purpose. You were just broken children. When we found you, we helped you survive. You turned me into one of your tools. No, Daniel. You turned yourself into one. We just gave you a direction. It wasn't a confession. It was a challenge. Mercer didn't regret anything. He believed in the system he'd built, one that raised children in chaos to test their ability to conform, obey, or collapse. Rhodes was a survivor, and Mercer had always seen that as validation. But now, Mercer had made one mistake. He'd taken Rhodes' sister. With a fury years in the making, Rhodes lunged. The fight was raw and uneven. Mercer was older, but he'd spent years in control, and control didn't let go easily. They crashed into desks, glass shattering, monitors toppling. Mercer clawed at Rhodes, trying to reach a panic button on the wall, but Rhodes slammed his arm away and grabbed the nearest object, a heavy metal clipboard, and brought it down across Mercer's wrist. The man screamed, collapsing to the ground. Bloodied and breathless, Rhodes pulled himself up. "You want loyalty? This is mine." He found the key fob on Mercer's lanyard, rushed down the corridor to Caroline's cell, and unlocked it. She blinked at him, dazed, and whispered his name like it didn't feel real. "Daniel?" He grabbed her shoulders. "We're getting out."
Now.
But as alarms finally began to blare overhead, Mercer's voice rang out over the PA, hoarse and furious. "You think this ends with me? You think we haven't prepared for this? Go ahead, run. But know this, every step you take is being recorded. You were always part of the experiment." Rhodes didn't hesitate. He pulled Caroline through the maze of corridors, ducking into utility tunnels and back exits until they burst out into the open night air. The cold hit like ice water, but they didn't stop. Not until they reached the car. Not until the gates of Redbridge disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed again by the darkness. For a moment, it felt like it was over. But 2 days later, back in his apartment, Rhodes received another envelope. Inside, a single photograph, an image from inside Redbridge, time-stamped only a few hours before the escape. It showed Mercer, bandaged but very much alive, standing next to a teenage boy. The boy looked eerily familiar. Same eyes, same posture. On the back of the photo, a message was scrawled in red ink. "He's not your sister's only sibling." Rhodes stared at it, the blood draining from his face. He hadn't escaped the program. He had just scratched the surface. Rhodes didn't return to the Force. After everything, the fire, the revelations, the twisted legacy buried under Redbridge's fluorescent halls, he knew there was no going back to the life he once led. His badge sat in a drawer now, beside the envelope with that final photo, both reminders of a truth he never asked for but could no longer deny. Caroline was safe, or as safe as she could be after years of calculated manipulation and trauma. Her recovery wasn't linear. Some days she remembered things she couldn't explain. Other days she forgot where she was entirely. But she had Rhodes now, and more importantly, she had a name again, her own. The program had stripped her of everything. Identity,
Autonomy.
even memory. But piece by piece, she was taking it back. And Rhodes would be there for every step. They moved far from the city. A quiet town, mountains in the distance, fewer eyes watching. It wasn't about hiding. It was about breathing without someone always listening on the other side of a wall. Still, Rhodes never let his guard down. He kept cameras around the property, walked the perimeter every morning before dawn. He knew they were out there, maybe not Mercer anymore, maybe not Redbridge in its original form, but someone was keeping the lights on somewhere. The program might have lost a building, but its blueprints were still alive. The photo had made that clear. The boy in it, Rhodes' twin, a mirror he'd never known existed, was a message. A final psychological scar to remind him that his freedom was temporary, conditional, performative. If they wanted, they could pull him back in with one move. But weeks passed and no one came. Rhodes dug deeper, using aliases and encrypted channels. He found whispers of similar facilities, code-named, stripped from public record, hidden under innocuous grants from obscure agencies. He wasn't the only one. Others had been taken too. Some didn't survive. Others never even knew what they were part of. He debated exposing it all, going public, feeding the media, leveraging trending keywords like government experiment, mind control program, missing children conspiracy, just to blow it open. But when he saw Caroline smile for the first time in years, he hesitated. If he went public, they'd come for her too. They'd spin it, silence it, bury it all over again. He wasn't ready to risk that. Instead, he documented everything. Not for the world. Not yet, but for her. For the future. Every detail, every piece of evidence, every face he could remember. A hidden archive locked in 3 separate locations, backed up across offline drives. If something happened to him, the truth wouldn't die with him. And one night, as the fire crackled in their cabin and Caroline fell asleep beside the dog they'd rescued, Rhodes stepped outside, lit a cigarette, and stared up at the sky. The stars were bright, unpolluted, peaceful, but he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was looking back. Then came a noise, subtle but deliberate. Not the rustling of wildlife, but something human. A footstep, slow and measured, just beyond the tree line. Rhodes stiffened, hand instinctively reaching for the weapon he now carried even in sleep. But then nothing. Silence. No movement. No figure emerging from the shadows. Just the wind. Still. He stood there, watching, heart pounding in a familiar rhythm. Not fear, not exactly. Anticipation. Maybe it was over. Maybe it wasn't. But for the first time in his life, he was ready either way. And somewhere in a different state, in a room lined with photos and classified reports, a boy who looked just like Rhodes watched a screen flicker to life. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, narrowed as he leaned forward. On the screen, Rhodes, standing in the snow, looking back at the forest. And then the feed cut to black. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun.